Hi, my name is Cecilia Puna, and welcome to this episode of Brave New Women. All around the world, there are amazing, ordinary women doing extraordinary things. Brave New Women is about giving those women a platform and a voice, and it's about changing the way that women are perceived. And it's a way of inspiring all of us to do the things that we've always wanted to do. Today I'm talking to Aisha, Hannibal and Ann Clements. And Aisha and Ann are the authors of a book called Red Tents, and the byline is Unravelling Our Past and Weaving Our Shared Future. And it was published last Friday by Womancraft Publishing. So first of all, congratulations on publishing the book.
Thank you very much.
Just a little summary of where you are and who you are and what you do. So Aisha has worked for over 20 years in the charity sector, and she's done an amazing range of things. So she's worked in frontline services with people experiencing domestic violence. She's trained teachers in intercultural learning in schools. She's set up international projects to educate and empower global and active citizens to promote peace. And at the moment, she's working with grassroots groups across the UK to make cities and towns more accessible for walking and cycling. And then 8 years ago, she and Ann co-founded something called the Red Tent Directory, which we'll be hearing more about a little later. So welcome, Aisha.
Thank you very much. Yeah, lovely to be here.
And Ann is a feminist writer, facilitator, activist and coach. And apart from working on the Red Tent Directory, she also initiated something called Healing Solidarity, which is an online annual conference and hub, which is about reimagining international development. So a very important project. And she's also a shadow work coach, an action learning facilitator, a TEDx speaker, and a movement practitioner. And she has her own podcast, which is called Change Making Women. So welcome, Ann.
Thank you so much. Yeah. It's good to be here.
My first question for you is, what is a red tent and where does that name come from?
Yeah, we get asked this a lot, so maybe I start and Aisha will add. So we were introduced to the idea of red tents by someone called Aisha Starkweather, who's based in the US and who we both met through a women's initiation program here in the UK called Women in Power. But red tents are something that Aisha had been talking about for a while before I think we heard it from her. And there were a number of other people who had also been talking about them and had got inspiration really from a book called The Red Tent by Anita Diamond, which is a fictional account of women in biblical times who gathered in a red tent in their community as a place for women that was just for women. To connect, to relate to one another, just to be, and to support one another. And it's an evocative description of that in the book. And it inspired a number of people to think about, well, what would it be like if we had spaces like this in our culture where women could meet and share and support one another, essentially. And so the inspiration for these spaces really, the direct lineage of them really comes from people being inspired by that book. But they also share a lot with other women's spaces in a number of cultures around the world. So they've been also inspired by other kinds of, for example, women's circles, which were about kind of educating women about patriarchy in the 60s and 70s, and then also indigenous practices where women have met in different communities in the world. So there are lots of things that they are kind of inspired by. But the inspiration for them being called the Red Tents really comes from that book, if you want to add, Aisha.
Well, I think you've explained it really clearly there. I mean, one thing that I think of with red tents is it's like having a day off or a few hours off from all of the ways that women are kind of showing up in their lives as caring for family members or children or professional work and just the expectations on women that are so huge, and there's a kind of a almost a relentless busyness that can happen. So red tents are almost like this kind of invitation to slow down and to have kind of unplanned time in the company of other people, and just to be able to kind of see what happens and be able to speak and to be heard and not be fixed and not be kind of diminished or devalued, all of the things that we might have almost come to feel as a normal part of getting through each day. So it's kind of almost like a trying to create something, a way of being together, which strengthens us so that we can show up more fully in our lives after we've had that time.
Mm. And do you think that that's particularly a need for women more than for men?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
And we've thought a bit about it, but I think what we talk about in the book is that there's a sense in which, as Aisha's already said, the specific cultural demands on women in a patriarchal culture are such that we often don't have time and space. And then there's also a way, again, that we track in the book and in our thinking to patriarchal structures. There's a way that we're often set up to compete with one another, to try and fix one another. And in the red tent, as we again talk about at length in the book, our invitation to people and what we've learned from others is about how to create a space where there isn't a need to do those things, right? Where there is just a space where you can be heard, a space where you can listen, and a space where you don't need to compete, where you actively kind of drop those things that may be present in other parts of your life. And you do it with intention, because you know that the space that creates is nourishing for you and for other people. So it's not to say that other people, that men wouldn't want a space like this, but I think we're not particularly writing to spaces for men, although we do talk a lot in the book about people who don't fit within the gender binary. Maybe Aisha, you can add a bit on that.
Yeah, and it was really important for us to kind of frame red tents within society. So to kind of look at why do we need to have a refuge? What do we need to rest from? So we really wanted to look at kind of the oppression within society, both looking at patriarchy and white supremacy, transphobia, ableism, all of the things that kind of are these ways of feeling divided or distant from each other. So we do look at gender in detail, and we wanted to, in particular, to explore when people don't feel comfortable in the gender binary, and that can often put them at risk. It can be, very difficult, very stressful. And we wanted to be really clear that red tents were spaces for cis women, for trans women, for people that identify as genderqueer or intersex, and that red tents were a space for them, and there was space at a red tent for them. So we really wanted to communicate that at times we'd seen that women's circles and women's communities can at times almost replicate some of the oppression within society. And we really wanted to be kind of a way of almost holding people's hands and showing them a way that we can disrupt some of the things in society that we don't want to replicate, that we want it to be very much kind of inclusive by design.
Mm. Have you set up red tents, or do you belong to red tents?
Well, yeah. So back, I think it's almost 10 years, actually. I should probably have some kind of celebration this summer. But yeah, it was about 10 years ago that I set up Brighton Red Tent in the south of England with a bunch of excellent other women. And we were really fortunate that there was a real kind of hunger for what we were offering, and it grew quite quickly. And we had, like 20 women or so coming, and often the way that red tents kind of emerge is that they're just hosted in people's houses. They can be in community spaces, they can take all different forms, but I suppose in its simplicity it can just be, I'm going to do it around my house, people are going to come around. So obviously there's almost like there's an amount that's comfortable for people to sit in. Most people's lounges are a certain size. So we were really fortunate, and it really grew. And I suppose this book is very much like an offering to the experiences and the wisdom that I kind of like witnessed really in both setting up a red tent. Participating in one was very much something that I really wanted to have in my life, and also to do it in a shared way where we were kind of a group of people bringing this into the community. So we were at times able to kind of step in and step back and therefore benefit from it ourselves, and not just be in that kind of full-on giving place and not be able to kind of drink deeply from it ourselves.
And I think like that's one of the key messages in our book really is around how do you share the creation of these community spaces. And we also do that in the Red Tent directory that we run. And we run our monthly meetings for that a bit like a red tent as well, as much as we can virtually. And most of what's in the book speaks to meeting in person. But of course, with COVID, lots of red tents have moved, at least temporarily, online. So we've also spoken a bit in the book to how you can kind of adapt the format, but still create a space online that is, an authentic space for sharing and is done with intention, and maybe is a bit different from the business meetings that you might be at online all the time these days, or the other things that people are doing online. So I think we're also running the project and the Red Tent Directory. I don't know if we've said, but it's a listing site for these events. So we're running that also like a Red Tent, in the sense that every month we meet and we have a space for sharing before we talk about what we need to do to keep the listing site running. So we're holding that space with the people we work with on the project as well. Yeah.
And Aisha, maybe I could ask you, what has been the biggest benefit for you from belonging to a red tent?
That's a really lovely question, and I think it's something that we discussed a lot. I mean, that's the beauty of kind of being co-authors, is we've been able to kind of share this journey and be able to learn as we go. And I think for me, it's kind of developed my ability to listen to other people, and I say a little bit in the book that I think it's made me a better parent, because so often we want to kind of rush in and fix things, and actually it's part of our children kind of learning resilience, like learning how to like show up really in the world. And so yeah, I think I've learned that, but also it's given me an ability to kind of practice some of the things that I want to do more fully in my own life. Like that's what we really hope with Red Tents, that we can almost model a way of communicating, a way of leading, a way of sharing, then it means that we can bring those things into our lives. And I think that, like, for me, almost having like a shared silence with people, it's just such a rare thing, for that to be welcomed and comfortable. So yeah, I suppose there's a quietness that I've learned, and also that I don't really know how I am until I'm listening to myself speaking. And then I'm like, oh, well, I keep saying that, so maybe that's a big deal and I need to look at it a bit more. So there's almost that kind of bearing witness on myself, because so rarely do we have a chance to even like think about how we are, because, life can be just so busy. So there's that kind of, right, I can slow down and I can really kind of have a moment to look inside and see how I am. So I think I'm able to pick up things earlier now, as they start to emerge, and not kind of get to like a burnout place.
So much greater self-awareness is what I'm hearing.
Yeah. And I get to learn from other people, and I think there's a freedom of knowing that you don't have to work it out all by yourself. You know, like by listening to other women, we can almost feel like they're like turning a mirror on our own lives and our own experiences. So there's a way that I kind of go, oh, that's another way of doing something, and it hadn't occurred to me. Or, you know, feeling someone else's pain and realizing that there's some pain for you too. So there's almost that that's kind of shared community that you get to kind of participate in, which is really powerful.
Yeah. Marianne, what's been your experience?
Yeah. So I was thinking, and this is in the book, so I didn't have to think all now, but I first went to Red Tent, I think, in 2009 or 10, so quite a few years ago now. And the big thing, or the biggest shift for me from participating in Red Tents, especially in the beginning, was a real sense that I wasn't alone in some of my experience. And so although my experience is unique to me, just hearing other women's experience without having to go, oh yeah, that's like me, or trying to fix it or help them or do anything, but just hearing that structure of just listening and then being allowed to just speak and no one interrupts you. First of all, there's a massive freedom in that, as Aisha said, but then also a sense of not being alone that comes just from the witnessing and not from trying to intervene in any way. And I think that for me, it was a really difficult time in my life when I first found Red Tents. I was in a job where I was really burnt out, my marriage was falling apart, all kinds of things. And being able to be honest and hear other people be honest about what was going on in their lives made a huge difference for me. And so I think that's why I feel, well, you know, it's one of the reasons I feel really committed to this work, because I think there's a power in that, the simplicity of that as well, you know, that can be created, and it can be created simply by anyone, really, you know, anyone who chooses to do that. Yeah.
Maybe one of you could jump in and just tell me about the book. What's the book? What's the purpose of the book?
It's a big question. I don't know. I mean, I think one of the reasons that we wrote it is because both of us are passionate about kind of the ability for Red Tents that's quite almost quite a simple form, which we talk about in the book. We wanted to empower people to be able to kind of initiate Red Tents for themselves. We also invite people to not call them Red Tents at all, but call them anything they liked, but this form. And also we interviewed 70 women and genderqueer people for the book who have experience of Red Tents or are passionate about bringing them into the world. So we also wanted to give a platform for a lot of other voices to kind of share their, you know, what they've enjoyed and what they find impactful. So it's not just kind of us talking, it's very much like threading and weaving through all these other sharings, and so that in a way it brings it to life, so that you almost feel like at one point we say it's a community between between bookends, and that we want people to almost feel like they are you know, being led through all the different things they might experience, or they might not, and that there might be conflict arise, or there might be issues, but that's really what community looks like. And you know, this is what I did, and this is what I did. So it's very much kind of many people's sharings and many people's works in this book.
And I would just maybe add that when we created the directory, we really just wanted to connect people, and we never really set ourselves up to kind of have a vision about what Red Tents were. We had a really simple toolkit, and it was very practical. But over time, we found that because we were listing, people were then contacting us and sometimes asking for help, as Aisha said, when conflict arose, or they were asking for help with, how do I tell people about my red turn? How do I get people to come? I'm feeling scared about this. I need help with that. And through that process, over a number of years now, we've learned a lot about what helps these community spaces to thrive, and also what doesn't seem to. And one of the clear things about that is this idea of shared leadership. And we talk quite a bit in the book about different ways that people have done that. And what we've noticed is that the red tents that do that tend to have more longevity, tend to be more of a community-owned space. I mean, I guess that's obvious in a way. Whereas if people set them up totally with great intentions, but on their own, it tends to be much more difficult to engage other people. And so that idea of shared leadership is really key for us. And then also we talk in the book, we have a whole section called Liberating Space, where we talk about different issues of inclusion, diversity. We talk about race and gender, as Aisha said, and disability and things. And I think we have become increasingly committed to helping red tents to understand those issues and work through them together. And that's what we try to do in the book. There's lots of reflection questions and ideas and things that people can think about. So we want to help people to make these more inclusive community spaces. And it's felt increasingly important to do that based on the experience, and the reason there are so many stories in the book is like weaving that experience together. Like, it's not just what I learned or what Aisha learned, but it's what we've been learning together.
Could you tell me a bit more about the shared leadership? What do you mean by shared leadership? What does that look like in practice?
Yeah, so I'll maybe start briefly, and then maybe you could talk about your experience, Aisha. So we look at different forms of it a bit in the book, but and it's based in the experiences of red tents who've done this in different ways. But many of them have created, they call it different things, like a steering circle or a guardian circle, but basically a structure that holds the red tent. So they're the people that maybe do the practical arranging, and then there's a way that they find between themselves through sort of trial and error to support one another to do that. So that then this community space that they're creating each month is held by a group. And it's not just held by one woman who then has to do all the work, all the effort, all the inviting, all the holding, all the providing. And one thing that we're clear about, so all the red tents that we list on our website are either free or they're donation based. So they're not like a business activity. And obviously many of us, including the two of us, do other things with women, for example, that are paid. But red tents we've really thought of as this community-owned free space where these things, this sharing and supporting and resting together can happen. And so that's also part of that shared leadership is, if we share it, I'm not putting in loads of myself and then feeling like, gosh, people are just kind of extracting this lovely experience for me. And in the conflict section, we have stories about that. We have stories about people who've tried to kind of do it themselves and later realized, gosh, it's really difficult just doing it myself. And I end up feeling resentful. So yeah, we're talking about finding a structure that can really support that holding and make it a shared experience, and allow those women who are part of the holding to also, as Aisha think has already said, experience the red tent themselves. So it's not every month you're on all the organising. Yeah. Add.
Yeah, you've said it all there, really, Marianne. We also did talk about how we feel at the moment that what the world needs right now is it needs kind of more examples of shared leadership, of sharing power, of exploring what power looks like, and that we often use that word of feeling empowered, but actually we do talk about what that might look like, that some people might not want to step up to leading, but we talk about leading as kind of traveling, like moving together. So we look at how there's all different ways that you can lead, and it might, it might not always look like you're at the front. It might look like you're kind of helping someone else to move forward, or it might be that you're looking at ways to develop your own skills and other people's, but it doesn't all have to be almost that archetype that we've been so used to seeing of like a single leader that kind of galvanizes support of people. So we really wanted to kind of offer something that we feel really is needed, and that women get to experience that and to value those qualities so that they can maybe emerge those into the world too.
I think that's such a strong concept. It's something that I think is so necessary. I mean, I completely agree with you about that. Aisha, do you have a particular story that touched you from the book?
Yeah, one of the things that we talk about red tents is that it's kind of this unplanned time, and so we have got a chapter called the middle bit. Like, what do you do in the middle bit? Like we talk through quite clearly the shape of what a red tent can be, what happens at the beginning and the end to kind of hold it. It's like, God, wow, the unplanned bit, what can happen? And that's quite a special part, because that is really what is emerging from the women that are coming together. And we give little, stories in the book about the kind of things that people have seen, happen in those moments of when someone's been really needing something, and then kind of the group of women can offer something and check in and see if that's something that's wanted. So there's a quote in it where we're saying, what is a blessing? What could that be if we offered that and just kind of created it in the moment? And one of the women, Lily, she says a blessing is just saying that something's important. It's marking a moment and kind of celebrating it and making that person feel special. So we're almost trying to demystify some of these words, and particularly perhaps in women's circles, they used almost like a jargon. So we really wanted to like remove any jargon and really kind of open it up for any woman to feel like they could offer a blessing, because all it is making someone kind of reflect on why it's important and perhaps what they need to mark that moment.
Mm. No, I love that. I love the idea of removing the jargon and just making things simple. And the more simple they are, the more they are important, and I think will touch people.
Yeah.
And Marianne, have you got any particular stories that touched you?
I mean, a lot of the book touches me, but I think there's a few things that stand out to me just thinking right now. I think at the beginning we have some stories about the setting of red tents, and what I love about those, rather than one particular one, is the kind of diversity of them. So there's like a red tent online, and then there's like a red tent by a river out in the open air, and one by a fire, and there's like a red tent just in someone's home. And I just thinking about it when you asked that question, I was just thinking, like, I love the difference in that it can kind of be what it needs to be depending on where you are, who you are, what spaces you've got, and that versatility, the simplicity of the structure we describe in the book, which, I usually talked about the middle bit, but then we talk about, how you open and give everyone a chance to share. And then in the middle, you do what you do, it emerges. And then there's a way to close, again, really simple. But I love that versatility of this idea, within this idea, there's so much space. And then there's another place where Emily, she's called. So she talks about emergent ritual. And I really love this concept. And we have a little section on it in the book. Like, one thing we've been clear about in the book is that these spaces don't have like one set, as I'm saying. It's kind of a versatile thing. And then there's also a tendency in some of these spaces to also sort of appropriate rituals from other cultures that maybe we don't know a lot about. And we talk a bit about culture appropriation, and it's, you know, it's a complex topic and a complicated topic, and there's a lot in it. So go to the book if you want to delve really deep into that. But there's this idea of emergent ritual, and it's really a bit what Aisha was speaking to in her piece about the blessing as well. It's like, what are the rituals we can create between us that help support and sustain us? And I love that idea of emergent ritual as being, you know, just a practice that we hold together, that we share as a group of people coming together regularly. And yeah, so I find that an inspiring kind of idea as well.
I'd like to ask you both, perhaps starting with you, Aisha, how was it writing the book together? How did you go about that?
Well, I mean, one of the benefits of having worked together for a number of years in the Red Tent Directory is that we know each other, and I think very, very soon in our kind of our friendship and relationship, we knew that we could work together, like we got each other, and that's, you know, a very special thing. So yeah, it's been 3 years coming together, and it really has been this kind of I mean, it's overused, this kind of metaphor of it being a journey, but we have, like, you know, it's been flowing and then it's completely stopped, and then there's been this the uncovering of so many issues in society at the same time. And so I would say this last year has been really interesting in terms of kind of where we've taken the book and being able to go to. But on a kind of a day-to-day practice, it's been, you know, it has been quite challenging. We've had a number of additional issues to kind of consider, like homeschooling. I gave birth to my son just over a year ago. I had quite difficult postnatal depression. So I've almost kind of been writing this at times at my own edges, and both in my kind of emotional edges and my energy, but also kind of really looking at these issues that we also felt were at the edges that we were trying to push. So there's been almost this kind of this relationship of us forming, or certainly for myself, kind of forming and growing and emerging back into the world after being very depressed, while also writing this book. So, you know, I'm sure that everyone feels like a book is very personal, like, you know, their baby girl going out into the world. But I also feel like there's so much of us that has gone into this book. And, you know, it's been a huge thing, I think, for both of us. But doing it together has just taken a lot of the pressure and the fear and those moments where you don't know if you can break through. We've just been together. So yeah, and I'm sure that Marianne has something to add to that.
I was just thinking, like, I don't think this book would have been, well, it probably wouldn't have been this book at all, but it definitely wouldn't have been as good a book if we hadn't written it together, because that process of sending it back and forth, and we sent it back and forth a lot of times, and each bit of it, like, we really did write it together. It's not like one chapter each or something. We've written this together. Has been like a real process. You know, there are many sentences we've talked about, you know, many times, and it's of course not perfect, but it is like a work of discussion and a work of togetherness. And even in this time of not having actually physically been together since, well, before Louis was born, almost 2 years, maybe a year and a half. And I had a miscarriage at the beginning of writing as well. So, like, we've written through our personal experiences and ups and downs. And I think doing that together has made that more possible, right? I think it would have been difficult to write through those personal struggles alone and through COVID, right? I mean, but it's, I think, being also like a fantastic experience writing together. And I feel really grateful that we've been able to do it. And I think, funnily enough, when we started saying, we've got to write about this because there are all these things we're learning and how do we share them? And I thought, we'll just write a book about it. We'll just interview some people and we'll read it, it'll be fine. It's been so much more of a journey than that idea in my head about how it was. It'll just be kind of a simple thing to do. It's been a totally life transforming thing to do, I think, in many ways. So yeah, that's what I would say.
How do you feel that it's changed you, Marianne, writing the book?
I think it's the writing together that's changed me personally. It's just been such a good process, to really be able to do something together with someone else, even though they're not anywhere near you physically. We live in different parts of the UK. I think that knowing that there's someone in the world that you could do something like that with, has been really special. And also, I think it's when we've had doubts about it or wanted to push it a bit more in terms of like getting some more information or thinking a bit more about something, I think having someone else to do that with, I've learned how you can go through things with someone else in a different way. I think, like Aisha said, because it isn't all on you, you can, you have to work with yourself and you have to work with your own, like, but I like my bit there, or, whatever that is. You do have to work with some of that. But the massive benefit is that you get to go together, It's like, and you get to go, actually, no, we need to say something about this. Okay, let's do it. You start. Oh, I don't know what else to do. I've started, but I'm not sure. Like, I've only done half of it and it's not right yet. You have a look at it. The other person adds something. You send it back. And you've got that iterative process. And that iterative process is how, many things in our world happen, right? How change happens in our world, how culture forms. And it's like the experience of doing that has been a really beautiful one, I think, for me.
Aisha, have you got anything to add there?
No, I think it's made me think that I don't want to do anything alone anymore, like I actually think that some of the kind of like the systems that we've created are actually quite lonely, like the family setup, I think, over this last year. This idea that you can receive all the friendship and the love and the support from one partner, and that you just are both two people, perhaps, if that's the structure you've created, that you're just kind of giving to these small people and educating them and all of that. And I'm just like, there just feels something that not wrong about it, but just like there's a richness that we could be kind of drawing on a lot more, that I suppose we kind of speak of in the Red Tent as being this kind of metaphorical community that you can kind of pull it, draw together. But there's certain things with this book that I just know that there's just no way that I could have done it without Marianne. And, I've learned so much from working so closely with someone that I almost just think, well, what's the point of just doing these things by myself anymore? Like, it might be okay, but it could be something really wonderful. And I could enjoy that process more. So yeah, I'm just looking at, where else can I bring this in?
If people want to get hold of the book, how do they find it?
We're on all the major book channels like Amazon, and coming soon on Barnes and Noble and Kobo as ebooks and as physical copies where they do physical copies. And you can also, if you'd like a signed copy, get one from our publisher. So they're Womancraft Publishing. They're based in Ireland. So if you're not in Ireland, it takes, a bit longer to get to you than it might from the likes of Amazon. But you can get a signed copy and support our publisher. So there's a choice there. Yeah.
Well, congratulations to both of you both for the support I think you're giving to so many women in the Red Tent Directory, in the book, in setting up your own red tents. I think that the ideas you've got are so powerful and so needed. I'm just blown away by the fact that you've contacted me, because there's so many of the ideas that I'm having at the moment. So it's fantastic. And what really strikes me when I'm speaking to both of you is how calm and fulfilled you both seem to be. And there's a sort of satisfaction that comes out of you from having written the books. It's been fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been wonderful to talk with you.
Those are very generous words. Thank you.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Brave New Women. Certain podcast sites such as Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts or Podchaser let you leave a rating and a review. The more ratings and reviews we get, the more people will listen and the more these women's stories will be shared. So I'd really appreciate it if you could. Thanks for listening.